Hi, everyone. I am Catherine Ayers-Wickenhauser, Director of Communications at Direct Trust, and I'm so excited today to be with Jitin, who leads Strategy and Corporate Development at Bamboo Health and was recently named one of our interoperability heroes. Jitin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here, Catherine.
Thanks, Jitin. So can you tell our listeners today a little bit about yourself and about Bamboo Health?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name is Jitin. I have been deeply involved in interoperability for the last decade and change. Started in interoperability really at the Office of the National Coordinator back at the time of David Blumenthal, and then subsequently Dr. Farzad Mostashari was involved in a number of initiatives there. After my term ended there, or was just about to end there, I landed at Athena Health, led interoperability R&D there for a number of years before helping to found and then lead Commonwealth Health Alliance, which I led for 5 years until the end of 2019, and then joined Patient Ping. And Patient Ping was then merged in with Apras Health, and the two became Bamboo Health just recently, just earlier this summer. And so Bamboo Health is a really interesting organization in that it is an organization which both benefits from and helps its users benefit from interoperability and drives interoperability itself, connecting thousands of really diverse participants across the care continuum in behavioral health, home health, skilled nursing, hospice, like this very long tail of really important destinations where particularly high vulnerability populations end up with for their care, and bringing the data and insights from those locations into the places where care coordination and care collaboration can be achieved. And so it's very, very sort of unique place to be, where we're meaningfully utilizing interoperability to change the outcomes, to improve the outcomes of high vulnerability populations. So that's what Bamboo Health kind of seeks to work on, and has been doing through its history, previously as Patient Ping and Apras Health.
Sure. And I have a follow-up question about Bamboo Health in a moment. But first, I want to know a little bit more about your background. So you described your varied background in, government, the nonprofit sector at Commonwealth, which, you were there for 5 years, and now in the private sector. And so I'm curious, how has your view of interoperability evolved, and what have you learned through those different experiences and different perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when I first got involved in interoperability back at the ONC, and we had these massive work groups that we kind of organized across the industry with 300 companies and organizations coming together to solve problems in standardizing the data coming out of the chart, the CCDA, standardizing lab data through this project called LRI, standardizing the ability to send messages, from one participant to another, Direct project, which became such an important protocol that now is stewarded by Direct Trust. As we were, and there were a number of other initiatives, but those three kind of really stand out in my mind. And all we were trying to do is figure out what are the spigots that should be opened such that data can flow in support of the transformation of healthcare that we could already see what's happening. It was the early days then. ACOs were not prevalent, but we could see that we were going to get into that space. ACOs, even MCOs are not that prevalent, but you could see what is going to happen. At Athena Health, more of the same, but really working from the EHR perspective. Like, how do we enable these things to happen? And the funny barrier that we all faced as an EHR, as a public policy organization, was the business incentives. The business incentives weren't really there to enable interoperability. And then a group of us EHRs came together. We founded Commonwealth. Another group of EHRs funded Care Equality. Those two organizations eventually became friends, and now you have a large number of EHRs who have come together forming those organizations. And as one of the leaders of one of those organizations, the big deal was, all right, we understand where the business incentives exist or don't exist, and we understand that we're going to try to make these realists or whether this. And it was still about opening the spigots. Policymakers had sort of defined the spigots. We defined some new ones, but it's about opening those spigots. And where things dramatically changed for me is maybe the last couple of years at Commonwealth, where the spigots finally opened. We finally saw data flowing in mass, right? If you look at Commonwealth carry quality numbers or direct trust numbers, we're not talking about a few hundred or a few thousand messages. We're talking about millions, billions over aggregate periods of time, right? It's amazing. And we realized, well, hold a minute, now we have a couple new issues that we have to deal with. As organizations, they have to deal with the quality of the data, the usefulness of the data coming out of the source, the ability for a receiver to understand it. But upstream, organizations like Bamboo Health and others, who downstream customers who really actually need to utilize the data, they have a slightly different problem. Their problem is they don't really care about interoperability per se. They need the right data to make the right decision to improve a patient's life, right? And a patient's care, particularly. And so getting closer to that problem, and really, I realized that the difference between being in an interoperability organization and an organization delivering care coordination is not like a 30% increase in focus on the problem. It's like a 300% increase in focus on the business problem. Sure. And so my own view has evolved because now I'm spending so much time thinking about the problem. It gives me a different lens with which to look at interoperability. Incidentally, as an aside, that's why when Directress awarded me this really prestigious kind of honor to be one of the interoperability heroes, I was ecstatic because I don't work for an interop organization per se anymore. I do obviously sit on some of the boards and advisory councils and so on. But my day job is really utilizing interoperability in a way that makes it meaningful. And if I had to summarize in a single line kind of what the journey has been like, Catherine, I'd say we went from making anything happen to making the things which happen now more meaningful for end user care. And that's what, like, the journey. I think that's obviously my journey in a very personal way for me in terms of what I do day to day. But I think that's an experience across the industry. Not that we don't have more sites to turn on, not that we don't have more work to do on getting the data to a better place, not that Bamboo Health is the be all and end all of meaningful use of the data. There's other organizations too who work in parallel with us. Many of them are partners, actually. Some are competitors. But it's the fact that that's what the industry has gone through in a period of just about 10 years, 10 years and change, 11 years now. So it's been a fun ride.
Sure. And it's so interesting to think about the different perspectives that people have and where they've been along on this journey and how they've seen it come to be. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit that it has only been 10 years, but still we think we should be further along. And it's incredible to hear your perspective and how it shifted too, and where you've been involved, and really thinking about where we're trying to get to go. And now you thinking about the business problem, you thinking about the usability. And from that perspective too, maybe could you tell us a little bit more? You mentioned that the users of Bamboo Health and the clients maybe don't care about interoperability, but they need the data. They need it then. They need it to make care decisions. So just from a broad stroke, how do I make interoperability more accessible? And how does Bamboo Health in particular, how do you all make interoperability more accessible for the people that you serve?
You know something, this is a phenomenon which the phenomenon I first observed back, I want to say 2013, 14, right around the time we were launching Commonwealth. And it was confusing to me then. And I think I finally get it this many years later. And here's the phenomenon. Let me tell you in a nutshell. We talked to a number of different care providers, right? And at various kind of roles in the industry, right? So think about RNs or physicians or clinicians and practitioners and PAs and, like a number of entities. And oftentimes when we say, okay, so would you like data from across the continuum for your patients, right? And at that time, it was really just acute and ambulatory. The world has thankfully evolved since then. But at that time, it was just acute and ambulatory. And the answer would be no. And I was like, no, really? And then when you talk to them about, well, what's your challenge in treating these patients, they talk about the kinds of things that they wish they knew about the patients. And in our heads, we're like, things you want to know, data. How are these not the same thing? Why are you telling me no, but what you really need is really the same thing? And what I realized is the fact that there's a disconnect between the data that is pushed onto you or that you even find and what you really need to make the difference, right? If you think about it, we created the CCDA, which is nobody's ever going to claim that's a perfect way of representing data, but it's the best we've come up with. And it's not actually that bad. It's pretty good. The issue is it doesn't know what you really need. It's just a place for holding data. So what you really need was one little piece and a couple of layers into that little piece, which the CCDA may not have. Well, we've just not served you well, even though the CCDA itself does capture quite a bit. And that's where Bamboo Health, not with the CCDA necessarily specifically, but in general, that's where we've really focused. What are our users trying to do? We're talking about accountable care organizations, payers, MCOs, other at-risk entities, whether they're provider organizations or others who are covered entities who are trying to who are enabling the care of the patient. What are they trying to do? They're trying to ensure that patients don't end up in high-cost settings where they'll get poor care, which is disconnected from the rest of their care, right? And that occurs all across the continuum. You end up in an emergency department, inpatient room, a skilled nursing facility. You're in your home, and something happened. Like there's all these places where if we could bring the right data together, it would be kind of nice. But if you could turn that into an action that you, as somebody who's responsible for the patient's care, a care coach, a care coordinator, a case manager, a primary care physician, a family physician, somebody who is thinking about how's my patient doing, whether or not they're right here in front of me for the few minutes I have with them. If we can get that person the right insight to be able to take care of that patient and guide that patient's care in a way that's helpful, as well as those physicians who really are taking care of the patient at that moment, you have an opportunity to dramatically impact patient care, ensure that they are ahead of where they need to be in terms of getting their proactive care that allows them to avoid high cost conditions, high mortality conditions, and the like. You have an opportunity for that patient to basically live their best life and not just be shuttled in and out of like the healthcare system for seemingly no good reason sometimes, at least from a patient perspective, because their care is so coordinated. So anyway, so that's where Bamboo Health really specializes, taking the data, and we have a lot of data because we created this brilliant network and we're borrowing other people's networks to get the data, but then taking that and converting that into an insight, turning that insight into an action, enabling that action to actually happen. Those are the things which we really focus on upstream from the interoperability. And that's why interoperability is a sort of important part of our DNA, but we don't necessarily say we're an interoperability company because we're really focused on those actions. And can you tell that I'm passionate about this stuff, Catherine?
Yes, yeah, and I love it too, because there are just so many different parallels between the organizations and the industry and what you think of. And I think so often in health IT, we're in our own little bubble and we use the word interoperability all the time. But I think to your earlier point, they don't care. End users don't care about interoperability. They care if they have the right information that they need and if it's actionable. And I think that's just a brilliant point that you underlined. And I'm glad that Bamboo Health is in this arena and making data actionable and insightful, because that's how we continue to advance interoperability. That's how we advance patient care. That's how we increase quality of care and keep costs down. That's how we decrease provider burden. We need the right information to flow at the right time and for it to be accessible. So kudos to you all, because that it's obviously a big problem, and I can hear the passion and describing it. And it's, it's something that we're just going to continue to try and solve and continue to try and advance. And so from that perspective too, I'm also curious, how has the bar for interoperability changed? So thinking about where we've described, the terms that we use for interoperability and how the data flows, if it's actionable, if it's not. So how has that changed? How has the bar for interoperability changed?
When we first started, and I'm gonna go back to the time when I was at ONC, right? The opportunity to share data from the EHR was dramatically limited, right? There were two issues. First of all, how to share the data such that anybody else could actually utilize it, anybody else could understand it. That was the big problem. The other issue, which ONC did not directly hit, but enabled the industry to hit to solve, was that it was very expensive, right? If I did want to get my data from my clinic to that hospital down the street, or vice versa, and we agreed to how we do it, and our technical team spent a bunch of time figuring out how we would format the data so we could get across. We still then had to build it. And in addition to all the resource and time it took for that company and myself, that provider organization and my provider organization, we'd probably be paying EHR vendors or other HIT vendors somewhere in the middle on the order of tens of thousands of dollars for the single connection between the two of us. Mm-hmm. It's always a very expensive kind of issue that we are trying to go after. That was 2010. Today, over the last couple of years, thanks to ONC, thanks to the EHR vendors, thanks to other HIT vendors who have brought in a bunch of innovation, thanks to Commonwealth Care Quality Direct Trust, Chic, Sequoia Project, and HL7, there's just so many organizations, right, who have really pitted themselves hard against this problem. Thanks to the work of this community, thanks to the work of this village, we're now at a place where if you are a provider organization wanting to share data with other provider organizations, it's expected that your EHR can do it. It's expected your EHR has multiple ways of doing it. And if not your EHR, then your interface engine, not your interface engine, some other HIT platforms you have within your four walls can provide that plug that others can plug into, and that you would be paying a relatively nominal price for it. Some cases, for some types of interop, so it's basically free, or maybe there's a one-time, let's go build a connection with my in-house resources. It'll take half a day and I'm kind of done. Or sometimes it's just a nominal like monthly cost or yearly cost or whatever. There's a bunch of the nice thing is now that it's affordable, there's a bunch of different business models that users can utilize as they think more and more about where to share that data. And that's become the expectation. More ways to more organizations through more means all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's become the minimum bar of the data. I think if the dimension is ubiquity, and another dimension is cost. There's probably a third dimension in terms of the data quality. We're earlier on that journey than we are on those other two journeys. With those two journeys are now at least 10 years old, and that's just my foray into health IT. Catherine, I'm an ex-e-commerce, ex-finance guy who has now been in this industry 11, 12 years running. But the journey to data quality it has been theoretical for a number of years. I think it's become practical over the last 3 or 4 years, where more and more we're asking the hard questions around. So how do you give me the data that actually is meaningful for this problem that I'm trying to solve? How do you give me the data that's practical for this problem that I'm trying to solve? And not just give me the blanket data no matter what problem it is I'm trying to solve. There's still a lot of work to go there. We have another decade of innovation on that front alone, for better or worse. But like that's the dimension along which I think I'm excited to see how that bar changes over the next few years. And for our part here at Bamboo Health specifically, we're working on some dimensions of that in the specific field of care coordination. But there's across the entire industry, whether it's research, clinical trials, whether it's payments and operations, whether it's other use cases of treatment, there's still lots of kind of innovation and runway ahead to just make the data better.
Sure. And so a couple of things. First, I love that you highlighted the community and health IT and interoperability, because that's always been so encouraging and welcoming to me about this industry, is that it really is a collective and group effort, right? Without other organizations, without the combined efforts of us all, we don't get anywhere. We don't advance. We don't make progress. And that was part of why we deployed Interop Hero, was because we wanted to hear more stories like what you're sharing about how this is the collective, right? These are all these individual stories that add up to this great thing. And I also love, hearing more about data quality and kind of thinking about where we're going in the future. And that really ties back to what you said earlier about what Bamboo Health does. And I'm curious too, so when you think about the future, and I'm assuming that you think that data quality is kind of part of the future of interoperability and improving interoperability, but what are some other key developments that you think that we might see?
You know, um, I think there are a few. You know, one thing I'll point out. So you caught on to the village aspect of it, right? Which
Yeah.
really should have probably been my first takeaway, right? Like it takes a village to do this.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, it also does take. Now this word interoperability heroes hopefully is sort of trademarked forever, but it takes a handful of people who are going to say we're going to make this happen, and it happens, and then a village to coalesce around it. You know, I do think to myself, for example, if Arian Malik had not been around, would we have direct projects? If David Kibbe had not been around, would we have direct trust? If Neil Patterson had been around, would we have Commonwealth? If Judy Faulkner had not stepped up to the plate, would we have Kerry Quality? Like, you know, these great organizations and things that we've all created, if we didn't have those people stepping up and say, we're going to do this, like, would it, and by the way, there's just a number more, you know, Dr. Halamka, like this, you know,
Sure.
I can,
Yeah.
Dr. Glasser, you know, all but a whole number of people, but around them, they brought together like people who had brought all this passion, and now we, you know, created villages, and now one collective, from the perspective of a collective village, we have just made so much progress. Coming to your point, I think as I see where the industry is going, I think what we're going to find is there may be again a couple of dimensions here. One is who's participating, right? You know, if you just think about meaningful use, was about where meaningful use made sort of the biggest push was enable data to be available to patients, and available data. Sorry, make the data available to other providers to whom you're transitioning. Right, and that was particularly meaningful use stage 2, and it's just, you know, the other programs subsequently have continued to build on that. I think where we're starting to see a lot more engagement is now across the rest of the continuum. Some organizations have been ahead of this curve, you know, some by years. Like I'm thinking of the Social Security Administration. You know, they've been involved long since before it was cool to call a non-provider entity like a participant in provider in the health data exchange. But others are really stepping into the plate now. So I mean, I do see more and more other parts of CMS, other parts of the commercial payer industry, research institutions, public health institutions, much more involved in data exchange now. I think, you know, I used to have this naive hope that one day I would walk into HIMSS and nobody would be talking about interoperability because it's just solved. You know, like there's nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
You don't get buzz for
No
something.
longer a buzzword. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's like, hey, I got a computer. Like everybody has a computer. Nobody cares anymore. I was you know, hoping that that's where, but we're not going to get there. And the reason we're not going to get there is because there is so much more we can do with it. Mm-hmm. I have a suspicion the words will change. You know, we don't talk about the internet anymore as if it's a brand new thing. It's not a brand new thing. But if you look at any number of IPOs, any number of really interesting companies, they're all doing something with the internet, the base layer that we just never conceived of before, right? And it's brilliant. And so I think we'll see some iteration of that continuously at HIMSS, at least for the rest of my lifetime. So it's actually heartening because it means that sort of, I think a number of innovation pathways have opened. And so I think we'll see innovation along each of those dimensions, serving different stakeholders, and within those stakeholders, certain problems that are trying to solve. I actually see over time the government getting more involved, federal government in particular, getting involved in those use cases which are being underserved because there's not a business model to help them serve, right? Where before they had to get involved in blanket interoperability. Mm-hmm. I do see a time in the future where that's not the case. They're really getting involved where the system is just letting down certain individuals or certain cohorts that need the help, but there's no business model around them. I think all other places and the majority of places are going to see a business model that actually aligns with interoperability and drives a spate of innovations which we, you know, probably can't even dream up right now.
So what you're saying is our village is going to keep getting larger. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and that's really exciting. And I think we see that personally too. You know, at Direct Trust, we have expanded the constituencies and the sectors that we serve. And I've heard the same thing from our peers. You know, at Chic is now becoming Civitas, and you know, Commonwealth continues to expand the use cases and what they're doing as well. And it's wonderful to see. I love hearing your perspective on it because it truly just validates the continued innovation. And I too have had the same thought of, will interoperability ever not be trending at HIMSS or at a conference? And I think it will be great to see if it does evolve and become something else, if we call it different terms, but when might that be? So I'm curious, Jitin. So this has been a great conversation, and I'm curious, just to wrap it up, do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom, or any advice for the listeners here today?
You know, my advice is, I'm going to come back to the village point, but I'm now going to paint it slightly differently. That village consists of a number of people who are driven by the same or very parallel missions, but have very different strengths. And those strengths are all really important. I really enjoyed being at the head of Commonwealth, and a large part of it was I had these wonderful team members from across these variety of EHRs and provider organizations and so on, who had slightly different motivations there and vastly different strengths. Mm-hmm. Strengths in technical strengths, business strengths in like program management, product, and different interests, like going along with the strength, maybe even more so than the strengths. But that we were all united by this mission. And as I think about Interop writ large, that's even more true, right? Whether you are a state HIE trying to enable your state's population to be adequately served, or you're a national data exchange trying to enable a broad fabric that everybody has availability to, or you're a Bamboo Health that's really focused on helping care coordination and support of vulnerable populations, or whether you're an EHR that's trying to enable a provider organization to be able to be the best provider organization they can by providing them the tools and workflows and so on to get there. No matter who you are, you have a role to play in interoperability, and it's not an unimportant one, because it's what makes this whole kind of industry move forward. I'm very hopeful one day by the efforts we're all putting in our own sort of special, unique way as members of the village, that the work we do here in creating, for lack of a better established term, our health internet here, as we all created together, it's just going to be something we all look back and say, wow, that was really unique, game-changing global platform we all built, and we all kind of built it together, even if we were not necessarily under one roof building it together, but we still did, and it's changed everything. And as a father of 3 kids, I think about what their lives are going to be like and what their kids' lives are going to be like. There's no limit to how far you can extrapolate your kids' lives when you're very passionate about them. And I just think that, hey, they're going to be living in a world with a different platform than I did, and certainly than my parents did. So that's my only piece of advice. Like, just keep going at it, and and don't underestimate your role in making this happen.
I could not have said that any better, as a parent myself too. So I think it's just incredible to really think about the past 10, 11 years and the progress that's been made, and thinking about the next 10 and what's going to happen. So really excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you for those words of wisdom and those predictions, and really excited to hear what people think of our interview today. So if people want to follow along with Bamboo Health or yourself, what's the best way to follow you or get in touch with you?
Best way to reach me is, email jasnani@bamboohealth.com. Please visit the bamboohealth.com website. I'm also on Twitter. I'm at my Twitter handle is Jitin @Jitin. Just feel free to reach out to me. Always happy to engage with anyone in the community, the broader community, to help us to move the ball forward. So please do reach out to me.
Sure. Thank you again so much, and have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you.